The Valoran Empire had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They had conquered more than 3,000 worlds across 6 different galaxies. Their warships were the size of mountains. Their weapons could turn entire planets into dust. No species had ever defeated them. No species had ever even tried. When their scout vessels found Earth, a small blue planet spinning around an ordinary yellow star. Fleet Commander Torvax felt nothing but boredom. He had done this 100 times before. He would do it 100 times again. The routine was always the same. Arrive. Demand surrender. Crush any resistance. Move on. Earth's technology was laughably primitive. They had barely reached their own moon. Their weapons were chemical explosives and nuclear bombs. Their fastest ships could not even leave their own solar system. Torvax estimated the conquest would take 3 days at most. Admiral Park Do-yeon was drinking coffee in his office in Seoul when the first reports came in. Strange objects had been detected entering Earth's atmosphere. Massive objects. Objects that moved in ways that defied physics. Within an hour, the entire world knew the truth. They were not alone in the universe. And their visitors were not friendly. The Valoran ships descended through the clouds like angry gods. Each vessel stretched across the sky, blocking out the sun. They appeared over Seoul, over Beijing, over Moscow, over New York. 30 ships in total. Each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a continent. Torvax broadcast his message to the entire planet. His translators had learned Earth's languages in mere minutes. The message was simple, people of Earth. You are now subjects of the Valoran Empire. You have 1 planetary rotation to surrender unconditionally. If you refuse, we will reduce your cities to ash. This is not a negotiation. This is a fact. The transmission ended. Torvax leaned back in his command chair and waited. He expected panic. He expected world leaders begging for mercy. He expected the usual chaos that came before surrender. What he got was silence in Seoul. President Kim Yoon-ah gathered her advisors. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had spent her career fighting political battles. She had never imagined she would face something like this. What are our options? She asked. Her military commanders looked at each other. The truth was obvious. They had no options. Earth's combined military might was nothing compared to a single Valoran destroyer. Fighting back would be like throwing rocks at a hurricane. But surrender meant extinction. The reports from the Valoran broadcast had been clear. Conquered species became slaves. Their cultures were erased. Their identities were destroyed. Within a few generations, they simply stopped existing as anything other than property. President Kim stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the massive shadow of a Valoran ship blocking the sun. Fear gripped her heart. But beneath the fear, something else burned. Something that had kept humans alive through ice ages, plagues, and wars. Defiance. Contact every nation, she said quietly. Tell them we need to talk. Not as enemies. Not as rivals. As humans, what happened next shocked even the most optimistic observers. Within 12 hours, every country on Earth agreed to unite. Old enemies shook hands. Bitter rivals shared intelligence. Nations that had pointed nuclear weapons at each other for decades now pointed those same weapons at the sky. The United Earth Defense Coalition was born in a single night. Admiral Park Do-yeon was chosen to lead it. Not because Korea was the most powerful nation, but because the Valoran flagship hovered over Seoul, and someone needed to look the enemy in the eye. Park stood before the assembled leaders of Earth. He was not a man who gave speeches. He was a soldier. But soldiers sometimes had to find words. I think we will surrender, he said. They have conquered 3,000 worlds. Every single one of those worlds gave up. Every single one decided that survival as slaves was better than death as free beings. He paused and looked at the faces around him. American generals sat beside Chinese commanders. Russian officers stood next to European diplomats. African leaders consulted with South American presidents. For the first time in human history, there were no flags in the room. Only people. They expect us to do the same, Park continued. They expect us to calculate the odds, realize we cannot win, and kneel. That is what every other species has done. That is what logic says we should do." He smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had accepted something terrible and found peace in it. But we are not logical. We are human, and humans do not kneel. President Kim Yuna addressed the United Nations 1 hour before the Valoran deadline expired. Her speech was broadcast to every screen on Earth. Billions of people watched. "They have given us a choice," she said. "Slavery or death. They believe these are the only options. They are wrong." She looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were calm. Her voice was steady. "There is a third option. We fight, not because we think we can win, not because we have a plan, but because we are human beings, and this is our home, and we will not give it up without a fight." She paused. "They have made a mistake. They looked at our planet and saw a primitive species with primitive technology. They did not look deeper. They did not see what we have survived. Ice ages, plagues, world wars. We have been fighting for survival since the first humans stood upright on the African plains. We are not soft. We are not weak. We are the children of a death world, and we do not surrender." The deadline passed. No white flags rose. No surrender was offered. Instead, Earth launched every nuclear missile it had directly at the Valoran fleet. On his command ship, Fleet Commander Torvax watched the primitive weapons approach. His shields deflected them easily. The nuclear explosions bloomed harmlessly against his defenses. He should have felt satisfied. He should have ordered the attack that would reduce Earth to rubble. But something nagged at him. A small voice in the back of his mind. A warning. No species had ever refused to surrender. Not once in 10,000 years. Why did these humans think they were different? He did not know it yet, but he was about to find out. The first wave of nuclear missiles did nothing. The Valoran shields absorbed the explosions like a pond absorbs raindrops. Fleet Commander Torvax watched the attack fail and felt a moment of satisfaction. These humans were brave, but bravery could not defeat physics. He gave the order. Plasma cannons fired. 3 cities vanished in columns of blue fire. 10 million humans died in the first minute of the war. Torvax expected this to end the resistance. It always did. Once a species understood the true power of the Valoran Empire, they broke. Fear was the most reliable weapon in the universe. But something strange happened. Instead of surrender signals, Torvax received another wave of missiles. And another. And another. The humans were not stopping. They were not even slowing down. Lieutenant Kong Ji-woo had been a fighter pilot for 12 years. She had trained for battles against other nations. She had never imagined she would fight aliens. But when the call came, she did not hesitate. Her squadron was given a mission. It was not a combat mission. It was a delivery mission. 20 pilots would fly directly into the Valoran destroyer that hovered over the Pacific Ocean. They would not be carrying bombs. They would be carrying soldiers. Men and women in pressure suits with explosives strapped to their chests. Everyone understood what this meant. The pilots would die. The soldiers would die. There was no extraction plan. There was no hope of survival. Every single pilot volunteered. They had to turn people away. Gi-woo led her squadron through the Valoran defensive fire. Plasma bolts tore through her formation. Half her pilots died before they reached the destroyer, but the other half made it through. They crashed their jets into the ship's hull. The soldiers inside cut through the alien metal with plasma torches stolen from destroyed Valoran drones. They fought through corridors filled with enemy troops. They died one by one, taking Valorans with them at every step. The last soldier, a young man named Chiminho, reached the engine room. He had been shot 7 times. He was bleeding from wounds that should have killed him. But he was still standing. He looked at the massive engine that powered the destroyer. He thought about his mother who had died in the first attack. He thought about his little sister, who was hiding in a bunker somewhere in Korea. He thought about all the people who were counting on him. He smiled and pressed the detonator. The destroyer exploded. Debris rained down on the Pacific Ocean for hours. It was the first Valoran ship destroyed by human hands. Torvax received the news in silence. He could not understand it. These humans had sacrificed 20 pilots and 30 soldiers to destroy a single ship. The mathematics made no sense. At this rate, Earth would run out of soldiers long before the Valoran fleet ran out of ships. But the humans did not seem to care about mathematics in a bunker deep beneath the mountains of Korea. Dr. Shinyonji had not slept in 4 days. She was a quantum physicist. Before the invasion, she had spent her time writing papers that only a handful of people in the world could understand. Now, she was leading a team of scientists in a desperate race. Against extinction, they had recovered pieces of a crashed Valoran drone. The technology was centuries ahead of anything on Earth. Most scientists would need years to understand even the basic principles. Yoonji's team figured it's out in a week. She stared at the data on her screen. The Valoran shields operated on a rotating frequency pattern. It was incredibly complex, far beyond human technology. But there was a flaw. A tiny gap in the pattern that lasted for exactly 3 milliseconds every 47 seconds. If a weapon hit the shield at exactly the right moment, it would pass through. She grabbed her phone and called Admiral Park directly. "I know how to kill them," she said. Within days, human weapons were being modified. Targeting computers were programmed with the shield frequency data. Missiles that had been useless now became deadly. The second Valoran ship fell over the Indian Ocean, then another over the Atlantic, then another over Europe. Torvax demanded an explanation from his science officers. How were these primitives adapting so quickly? How were they learning Valoran technology faster than species that had been spacefaring for millennia? The answer terrified him. "Commander," his chief scientist said, "humans appear to have an unusual ability to learn under pressure. Their brains actually work faster when they are afraid. Their creativity increases when they face death. They do not freeze when confronted with impossible odds. They adapt." Torvax had conquered hundreds of species. All of them had one thing in common. When faced with overwhelming force, they became paralyzed. Fear made them stupid. Fear made them slow. Humans were the opposite. Fear made them dangerous. He ordered reinforcements from the Empire. 500 more ships arrived within a month. Then 1,000. Then 2,000. Earth burned. Cities turned to ash. Billions of people died. The oceans boiled in some places. The sky turned gray with smoke and dust, but the humans kept fighting. They built weapons in underground factories. They trained soldiers in hidden camps. They shared information through networks that the Valorans could not find or destroy. Every time the Valorans thought they had one, the humans struck back. A supply convoy destroyed. A command center bombed. An officer assassinated. Private O. Murray was 17 years old. Before the war, she had been a high school student who liked music and hated math. Now she was one of the most wanted humans on the planet. She had destroyed a Valoran command center by herself. She had walked in pretending to be a slave, carrying a plasma rifle hidden under her clothes. She had killed 30 Valorans before they managed to capture her. They brought her before Torvax himself. She was small and thin and covered in blood. Her hands were bound. Her face was bruised. She should have been terrified. She was smiling. "Why do you fight?" Torvax demanded. "You cannot win. Your species is outnumbered and outgunned. Logic says you should surrender." Murray looked at him with eyes that held no fear. "You think this is about winning?" she said. "This was never about winning. This is about making you pay. For every human you kill, we will kill 100 of you. For every city you destroy, we will destroy 10 of your ships. You might beat us in the end, but you will never forget us. You will have nightmares about us for the rest of your lives." She opened her mouth and bit down on something hidden in her tooth. The explosion killed her instantly. It also killed 3 Valoran officers and destroyed half the command room. Torvax survived, but something inside him died. For the first time in his long career, he felt fear. 1 year into the war, Earth looked like a dying world. Half the major cities had been destroyed. The atmosphere was thick with ash and smoke. Clean water was rare. Food was scarcer. The human population had dropped by 3 billion. Any other species would have surrendered long ago. The Valorans had seen it happen countless times. There was always a breaking point. A moment when the pain became too much and the survivors gave up. They kept waiting for humanity's breaking point. It never came. General Baek Sunho commanded the resistance forces in Korea. Before the war, he had been a quiet man who loved books and classical music. Now he lived in tunnels beneath the ruins of Busan. Leading an army of survivors who refused to die, his soldiers had no uniforms. They wore whatever clothes they could find. Their weapons were a mix of old rifles, stolen alien technology, and things they had built themselves. They ate rats and insects, and sometimes nothing at all. But they fought. Every single day they fought. The Valorans had superior technology. They had thermal sensors that could detect body heat through walls. They had drones that could track movement from orbit. They had weapons that could level buildings with a single shot. Sunho learned to beat all of it. When the Valorans used thermal sensors, his soldiers covered themselves in mud and clay. They moved through sewers and underground rivers where the cold water masked their body heat. They learned to stay perfectly still for hours, barely breathing, waiting for the enemy to pass. When the Valorans sent drones, the humans shot them down with homemade missiles. When they sent ground troops, the humans led them into traps, buildings rigged to explode, streets filled with hidden holes and spikes, tunnels that collapsed on command. The Valorans were not used to this kind of warfare. They were used to standing battles. Two armies facing each other on an open field. Clean, simple, predictable, human. Warfare was none of those things. Sunho taught his soldiers the old ways. Ways that humans had used to fight each other for thousands of years. Guerrilla tactics. Hit and run. Strike from the shadows and disappear before the enemy can respond. The Valorans began to fear the dark in the ruins of Tokyo. A woman named Yu Sora led a different kind of resistance. She was not a soldier. She was a nurse. Before the war, she had worked in a children's hospital. Now she ran an underground medical center where wounded fighters were patched up and sent. Back into battle, Sora had seen more death in 1 year than most doctors see in a lifetime. She had operated on patients with no anesthesia. She had amputated limbs with kitchen knives. She had held the hands of dying children and promised them that everything would be okay, knowing it was a lie, but she never stopped. Every life she saved was another soldier who could fight. Every wounded human she healed was proof that the resistance was still alive. The Valorans tried to find her hospital. They offered rewards to anyone who would reveal its location. They threatened to destroy entire neighborhoods if she did not surrender. Sora moved the hospital 3 times. Each time, the patients were carried through miles of tunnels by volunteers who knew they would be killed if they were caught. Each time, not a single person betrayed them. The Valorans could not understand this. In every other conquest, there had been traitors. People willing to sell out their own kind for safety or rewards. It was basic survival instinct. Self-preservation above loyalty. But the humans seemed to have a different instinct. They protected each other even when it meant their own death. They died for strangers. They sacrificed themselves for people they had never met. Commander Torvac studied the reports with growing unease. His forces controlled the skies. They controlled the major land masses. They had killed billions of humans, but they were losing soldiers every day. Not in big battles. In small encounters, ambushes, traps, assassinations, a steady drip of casualties that never stopped. His officers were becoming afraid. Some refused to leave their ships. Others asked to be transferred to different sectors. A few had simply disappeared, deserting their posts and fleeing into deep space. The humans had a word for this. They called it terror. Torvax had used terror as a weapon for centuries. He had never imagined it could be used against him, in a hidden laboratory in the Swiss Alps. Dr. Yoon Hajan was building something impossible. Before the war, Hajan had been a theoretical physicist. He had written papers about faster-than-light travel that his colleagues dismissed as fantasy. The mathematics worked, he insisted, but no one believed him. The energy requirements were too high. The technology did not exist. The Valorans had proven him right. When the first Valoran ships arrived, Gun immediately understood what they were. Faster-than-light engines, exactly as he had predicted. His theories were correct. He just needed to build one. He worked for 18 months. His team was small, a handful of engineers and scientists who had survived the early attacks. They had almost no resources. They scavenged parts from destroyed Valoran ships. They improvised constantly. The lab lost power at least once a week. Food ran out regularly. 3 team members died during the project. 2 from illness and 1 from a Valoran. Bombing raid that came dangerously close, but they never stopped. On a cold Tuesday morning, Hagen powered up his creation for the first time. The machine hummed. Lights flickered. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a small metal sphere vanished from one end of the lab and appeared at the other end. Instantaneously. Faster than light, Hagen stared at the sphere with tears in his eyes. Humanity had just joined the Towant stars. He sent a message to Admiral Park. It was only 2. Words were ready. The next phase of the war was about to begin. The humans were no longer just defending. They were about to attack, and the Valorans had no idea what was coming. Admiral Park Do-Yan stood in a cavern deep beneath the mountains of Greenland. Before him sat a fleet unlike anything humanity had ever built. 47 ships cobbled together from cargo vessels, civilian aircraft, and salvaged Valoran technology. They were ugly. They were crude. Many of them probably should not have been able to fly at all, but each one carried Dr. Yoon Hajin's faster-than-light engine. Each one could now travel between stars. Park looked at the men and women who would crew these ships. They were not professional soldiers. They were factory workers and teachers and farmers. They were survivors who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. They were also the first human space fleet in history. "You all know the situation," Park said. His voice echoed in the vast cavern. "The Valorans still control our skies. They still have more ships than we can count. By every logical measure, we should have lost this war months ago." He paused and looked at the faces before him. Some were scared. Some were angry. All of them were determined. But logic does not apply to us. We are human. We do not know how to give up. And today, we take this war to them. The ships launched one by one, rising through hidden tunnels that led to the surface. They emerged into a sky still dark with Valoran vessels. Plasma fire streaked toward them. Immediately, 12 ships were destroyed in the first minute. The others activated their faster-than-light engines and vanished. Commander Torvax received the report with disbelief. Human ships had somehow acquired faster-than-light capability. They had escaped Earth's gravity well. They were now somewhere in open space, beyond the reach of his sensors. This was not possible. The humans were a primitive species. They should not have been able to develop this technology for centuries, perhaps millennia, but they had done it in less than 2 years. Captain Chohanna commanded the Soul's Fury, a converted cargo ship that had no business being in a battle. Her crew was 23 people. Her weapons were 2 plasma cannons salvaged from a crashed Valoran, destroyer, and a missile launcher held together with welding and prayer. She was also one of the best pilots humanity had ever produced. The Souls Fury emerged from faster-than-light travel behind the Valoran flagship. This was the ship that carried Commander Torvax himself. This was the heart of the invasion. Hannah did not hesitate. She opened fire with everything she had. The plasma cannons struck the flagship's shields. The shields held, but they flickered. The missiles followed, timed perfectly to hit during the 3-millisecond gap that Dr. Shin Yoonji had discovered. 2 missiles got through. They struck the flagship's communication array, destroying it instantly. The Valoran fleet was now blind. Their commander could not give orders. Their ships could not coordinate. Chaos spread. Human ships appeared all across the battlefield. They struck quickly and then vanished. jumping to new positions before the Valorans could respond. It was guerrilla warfare in 3 dimensions. It was exactly what General Beek Sunho had taught the resistance fighters on the ground, but now applied to space combat. The Valorans did not know how to fight this way. They formed defensive formations that the humans simply bypassed. They tried to pursue the human ships, but the humans were faster and could appear anywhere. Commander Torvax screamed orders that no one could hear. His communication array was destroyed. His fleet was in disarray. For the first time in his life, he was losing. The Soul's Fury took heavy damage during the battle. One of her engines failed. Her shields collapsed. Plasma fire tore through her hull, killing half the crew. Captain Hannah was bleeding from a wound in her side. Her first officer was dead. Her weapons were nearly depleted. She had every reason to retreat. Instead, she looked at the Valoran flagship and made a decision. "All hands abandon ship," she announced. "Get to the escape pods." "That is an order," her surviving crew protested. They wanted to stay and fight with her. Hannah refused. She physically pushed her navigation officer toward the escape pod. "Someone has to tell them what we did here," she said. "Someone has to let Earth know we won. That will not be me. But it will be you." The escape pods launched. 12 people, all that remained of the crew, watched from space as the Soul's Fury turned toward the Valoran flagship. Hannah pushed her damaged engines to full power. Warning lights flashed across her console. The ship was tearing itself apart. She did not care. She opened a channel. She knew the Valorans would hear it. She wanted them to hear it.
"My name is Cho Hannah. I was a cargo pilot before you came.
I delivered fish and vegetables between Busan and Tokyo. I was nobody important." The flagship grew larger in her viewport. Plasma fire streaked past her ship. She dodged most of it. The rest she absorbed. "You killed my husband in the first attack. You killed my daughter when you bombed Seoul? You took everything from me?" Her ship was dying. Flames filled the corridor behind her. The hull was cracking. "Now I am going to take something from you." The Soul's Fury struck the Valoran flagship at full speed. The impact tore through the flagship's weakened shields. The cargo ship's reactor, pushed far beyond its limits, exploded with the force of a small sun. The flagship broke apart. Commander Torvax, who had conquered hundreds of worlds, died in the explosion. The Valoran fleet, leaderless and panicked, began to retreat back on Earth. Survivors watched the battle through telescopes and intercepted transmissions. They saw the Valoran ships pulling back. They saw the flagship's explosion. They saw victory. For the first time in 3 years, people cheered. They hugged each other and cried. They danced in the ruins of their cities. They had lost so much, but they had won. Admiral Park received the news in his command bunker. He sat down heavily and allowed himself one moment of grief for all the people who had died, for Captain Hannah and her crew, for the billions who would never see this day. Then he stood up and got back to work. The war was not over yet. 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days. That was how long the war lasted. That was how long it took for humanity to do what no other species in the galaxy had ever done. The last Valoran ship fled. Earth's solar system on a cold morning in December. Admiral Park Do-yan watched it go from the bridge of the United Earth, humanity's first purpose-built warship. She was not pretty. She was not elegant. But she was powerful, and she was theirs. Commander Lee Jesu stood beside him. She had been a junior officer when the war started. Now, she was his second in command. She had survived more battles than she could count. She had lost friends and family and pieces of herself that would never come back. But she was still standing. They all were. "Should we pursue them?" she asked, watching the Valoran ship disappear into the darkness of space. Park considered it for a long moment. The temptation was strong. 3 years of death and suffering and loss. 3 years of watching his people die. The Valorans deserved to pay for what they had done. But Park was tired and wise. And he knew something that the Valorans did not. "No," he said finally. "Let them go. Let them run back to their empire. Let them tell everyone what happened here. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. Let them spread the word about Earth. The surviving Valorans did exactly that. They scattered across the galaxy, carrying stories that grew with each telling. They spoke of a species that refused to surrender, of soldiers who turned their own bodies into weapons, of scientists who stole technology and mastered it in days, of civilians who fought with kitchen knives and bare hands and never stopped. The Galactic Council convened for the first time in 1,000 years. 3,000 species sent representatives. They filled a station the size of a small moon. All of them gathered to discuss a single question. What do we do about Earth? The Valoran ambassador stood before the assembly. He was old now, scarred and broken by what he had witnessed. He had been a young officer when the invasion began. He was one of the few who had survived to see its end. We sent 10,000 ships, he said. His voice trembled. 10,000. The largest fleet in Valoran history. We had weapons that could crack planets. We had technology that these humans could not even understand. He paused. The silence in the chamber was absolute. They had nothing. Primitive rockets, chemical explosives, ships that could barely leave their own atmosphere. He looked around at the assembled species. Many of them had been conquered by the Valorans. Many of them knew what it meant to face that. Fleet, they destroyed us. Murmurs spread through the assembly. Disbelief, fear, curiosity. Not just defeated, destroyed. They took our technology and improved it. They learned our tactics and countered them. They sacrificed themselves in ways that made no logical sense, and somehow it worked. He took a deep breath. We conquered 3,000 worlds. Every single one surrendered when they saw our power. Every single one calculated the odds and chose survival over pride. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. The humans did not calculate. They did not surrender. They did not care about the odds. They saw us coming for their home, and they decided they would rather die than kneel. He looked directly at the council leaders. They did not die. We did. The debate lasted for days. Some species demanded a preemptive strike. Destroy the humans before they spread, before they built more ships, before they became a threat to the entire galaxy. Others advocated containment. Surround the solar system. Block all access. Let the humans stay on their little planet forever. A few suggested diplomacy. Trade with them. Learn from them. Make them allies instead of enemies. But the Valoran ambassador spoke again, and his words silenced everyone. You do not understand what they are. They are not a civilization. They are not a species that can be reasoned with, or contained or controlled. They are a force of nature. He stood straighter, and for a moment the old officer looked almost afraid. They enjoy it. The fighting, the struggling, the impossible odds. They thrive on adversity. They become stronger when you try to break them. And if you threaten them, if you harm their children, if you try to take their home, they will not stop. They will hunt you across every star system in the galaxy. They will burn your worlds and salt your fields, and they will not stop until your species exists only in their history books. The chamber was silent. Leave them alone, he said. That is my recommendation. Leave them alone, and pray they do the same for you. The council voted unanimously. Earth was to be designated a forbidden zone. No species was to approach. No contact was to be attempted. A permanent beacon was placed at the edge of the solar system. It broadcast a message in every known language. Warning. Earth. Level 12. Death World. Inhabitants are hostile, adaptive, and relentless. Do not engage under any circumstances. Turn back now. Back on Earth, humanity began to rebuild. The scars of war were everywhere. Empty cities, poisoned lands, billions of graves. It would take generations to heal, but they were alive. Against all odds, against all logic, against the greatest military power the galaxy had ever known. They were alive. President Kim Yuna, old now, but still strong, gave the speech that would echo through history. We did not ask for this war. We did not want it. We were a peaceful species, too busy fighting each other to notice the stars. She stood before the ruins of Sol, where the first Valoran ships had appeared. Behind her, construction crews worked to rebuild what had been destroyed. But when they came for us, we did not hesitate. We did not calculate. We did not kneel. We stood up and we fought, and we showed the universe what humans are made of. She looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, alien species were watching, waiting, wondering. Let them watch. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Because we are human. We are fragile and mortal and short-lived. We fight each other constantly. We make mistakes. We fail. She smiled, and in that smile was the weight of everything humanity had suffered and survived. But we never give up. We never surrender. We never stop fighting for what is ours. And now, the galaxy knows it. Across the stars. Civilizations that had never known fear learned a new word, human, and they trembled. The war was over. But humanity's journey among the stars had just begun. They built ships that could cross galaxies. They made contact with other species, peaceful ones, who wanted to trade and learn. They explored worlds that no human had ever seen, and everywhere they went, the story followed them. The story of the small blue planet that refused to die, the story of the species that fought gods and won. Some called them heroes. Some called them monsters. Most just called them by their name. Humans, the terror of Earth, the ones who never kneel.